If you need to go back and watch the previous clips, I'll link to them up above my head here. Buchanan's view of human nature was distinctly dismal. Adam Smith saw human beings as self-interested and hungry for personal power and material comfort, but he also acknowledged social instincts like compassion and fairness. Buchanan, in contrast, insisted that people were primarily driven by venal self-interest. Crediting people with altruism or a desire to serve others was romantic fantasy. Politicians and government workers were out for themselves, and so, for that matter, were teachers, doctors, and civil rights activists. They wanted to control others and wrest away their resources. Each person seeks mastery over a world of slaves, he wrote in his 1975 book, The Limits of Liberty. Does that sound like your kindergarten teacher? It did to Buchanan. This dude is seriously fucked up. The people who needed protection were property owners, and their rights could only be secured through constitutional limits to prevent the majority of voters from encroaching on them, an idea Buchanan lays out in works like Property as a Guarantor of Liberty, 1993. McLean observes that Buchanan saw society as a cutthroat realm of makers, entrepreneurs, constantly under siege by takers, everybody else. His own language was often more stark, warning the alleged prey of parasites and predators out to fleece them. I have to say, I've read this whole thing and I'm trying to figure out how he's going to make things without workers. I wonder how many of his big ideas would have come to fruition without the workforce. In 1965, The Economist launched a center dedicated to his theories at the University of Virginia, which later relocated to George Mason University. McLean describes how he trained thinkers to push back against the Brown versus Board of Education decision to desegregate America's public schools and to challenge the constitutional perspectives and federal policy that enabled it. She notes that he took care to use economic and political precepts rather than overtly racial arguments to make his case, which nonetheless gave cover to racists who knew that spelling out their prejudices would alienate the country. All the while, a ghost hovered in the background, that of John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, Senator and 7th Vice President of the United States. Calhoun was an intellectual and political powerhouse in the South from the 1820s until his death in 1850, expending his formidable energy to defend slavery. Calhoun, called the Marx of the master class by historian Richard Hofstadter, saw himself and his fellow Southern oligarchs as victims of the majority. Therefore, as McLean explains, he sought to create constitutional gadgets to constrict the operations of government. Economists Tyler Cowen and Alexander Tabarrok, both of George Mason University, have noted the two men's affinities, heralding Calhoun a precursor of modern public choice theory who anticipates Buchanan's thinking. McLean observes that both focused on how democracy constrains property owners and aimed for ways to restrict the latitude of voters. She argues that unlike even the most property-friendly founders, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, Buchanan wanted a private governing elite of corporate power that was wholly released from public accountability. It's pretty easy to see where the CIA fits into all of this. Suppressing voting, changing legislative processes so that a normal majority could no longer prevail, sowing public distrust of government institutions, all these were tactics toward the goal, but the holy grail was the Constitution. Alter it, and you could increase and secure the power of the wealthy in a way that no politician could ever challenge. Gravy train to oligarchy. McLean explains that Virginia's white elite and the pro-corporate president of the University of Virginia, Colgate Darden, who had married into the DuPont family, found Buchanan's ideas to be spot on. In nurturing a new intelligentsia to commit to his values, Buchanan stated that he needed a gravy train, and with backers like Charles Koch and conservative foundations like the Scaife Family Charitable Trusts, others hopped aboard. Money, Buchanan knew, can be a persuasive tool in academia. His circle of influence began to widen. McLean observes that the Virginia school, as Buchanan's brand of economic and political thinking is known, is a kind of cousin to the better-known market-oriented Chicago and Austrian schools. Proponents of all three were members of the Mont Pelerin Society, an international neoliberal organization which included Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek. But the Virginia school's focus and career missions were distinct. In an interview with the Institute for New Economic Thinking, INET, McLean described Friedman and Buchanan as yin and yang. Friedman was this genial, personable character who loved to be in the limelight and made a sunny case for the free market and the freedom to choose and so forth. Buchanan was the dark side of this. He thought, okay, fine, they can make a case for the free market, but everybody knows that free markets have externalities and other problems. So he wanted to keep people from believing that government could be the alternative to those problems. That's a key idea when you're talking to your Republican friends who say they want small government. And you'll see how these masterminds want us to think that small government is good so that there's no checks on their power. The Virginia school also differs from other economic schools in a marked reliance on abstract theory rather than mathematics or empirical evidence. That Nobel Prize was awarded in 1986 to an economist who so determinedly bucked the academic trends of his day was nothing short of stunning, McLean observes. But then it was the peak of the Reagan era, an administration several Buchanan students joined. Buchanan's school focused on public choice theory, later adding constitutional economics and the new field of law and economics to its core research and advocacy. The Economist saw that his vision would never come to fruition by focusing on who rules. It was much better to focus on the rules themselves, and that required a constitutional revolution. McLean describes how the Economist developed a grand project to train operatives to staff institutions funded by like-minded tycoons, most significantly Charles Koch, who became interested in his work in the 70s and sought the Economist's input in promoting Austrian economics in the U.S. and in advising the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank. Koch, whose mission was to save capitalists like himself from democracy, found the ultimate theoretical tool in the work of the Southern Economist. The historian writes that Koch preferred Buchanan to Milton Friedman and his Chicago boys because, she says, quoting a libertarian insider, they wanted to make government work more efficiently when the true libertarian should be tearing it out at the root. So make no mistake, these guys don't want liberty. They want slavery. And yet so many libertarians are pulled in by this kind of thinking. If you're a true libertarian, you're going to see through all this bullshit. With Koch's money and enthusiasm, Buchanan's academic school evolved into something much bigger. By the 1990s, Koch realized that Buchanan's ideas, transmitted through stealth and deliberate deception, as McLean amply documents, could help take government down through incremental assaults that the media would hardly notice. The tycoon knew that the project was extremely radical, even a revolution in governance, but he talked like a conservative to make his plans sound more palatable. So listen, folks, an honest-to-goodness conservative is not our problem. These assholes are the problem. To go on to the next clip, click above the shiny orb above my eyeballs.